very good friend of mine, I was over at his house a number of years ago, and said to his wife, she said, honey, we're out of milk. I wonder if you could go down to the corner store, just pick up a carton of milk so that we could have a coffee here while we're meeting, which was not bad, and she agreed to do it. But then he went one step further, and he looked at his watch, and he said, should take you about 15 minutes. And I was very puzzled by that. When his wife left, I said to him, I said, why are you timing your wife? And his answer was, well, it's a very cruel world out there. And she might get mugged or she might get beaten. But as we discussed this, it became pretty evident that it wasn't an issue of fear for the safety of his wife. It was more of a control issue. Would she come back? What else would she do while she was out there? Who would she see? Who would she talk to? How would I know about it? So by limiting the time was an opportunity for him to maintain this control over behavior. I know you come here today with so many hopes, dreams, so much to look forward to. And you're here today because you have decided to be together, to grow together, and to build a life together. And abuse is probably one of the last things that you're expecting to hear about. But we need to talk about it. And one of the reasons we need to talk about it is because it's real. It exists and it creeps into relationships. And my hope is that if we can expose it for what it is, what it looks like, then maybe we can save a few of those dreams and change a few of those behaviors. From a very early age, all of us are encouraged to become independent, autonomous, and competitive, to set personal goals, to go for the brass ring, to go for gold. And to survive, many of us have to become strong. We're encouraged to become autonomous, assertive individuals. Often, we have to fight for our beliefs. And then we get married. And somehow, we hope that those two independent, autonomous, assertive individuals will always get along. They will always compromise. They will always mesh. And they'll form a wonderful partnership. This is a nice thought, but it's not that simple. You see, commitment, self-sacrifice, and a collective energy are important, but sometimes dreams and expectations conflict. We hope for the best, but hope without determination and effort, without commitment, lead to feelings of frustration, disappointment, and hopelessness. And unfortunately, there's no place like home for either happiness or violence, laughter or loneliness. So you see, love, unlike infatuation, is more than an emotion. It's a decision. It's an informed choice. And it's an action. It's what you do, it's what you think, and it's what you say. And what you do, what you say, what you think does matter. Your marriage is a commitment to the other person, and it lives in the present. Every day you have a choice. Every day you make a decision. Every day you take some action. Every day you can nurture that love and that relationship. Every day you can stifle that love and that relationship. Every day you can kill that love and that relationship. It's up to you. So what is abuse? We tend, when we use the word abuse, we tend to think of physical violence. But abuse is more than just domestic or physical violence. It's about control. The opposite of trust in our relationship is control. Control says, I don't trust you. I don't trust what you're going to do. I don't even trust myself. Control chokes the relationship by denying personal growth. It strives to kill the spirit in order to control the body. If your partner does things that make you afraid, that isolate you from your friends or your family, you may be the victim of abuse. Abusive persons make use of violence. They make use also of guilt trips and various coercive methods and procedures to control the one they want to control, the one they want to abuse. Very often the signs are subtle. controlling who you talk to, how you dress, where you go, checking your phone to see who called you, limiting your freedom as if you were a child. See, abusers need to control. They need to dominate. They need to demean, and if necessary, they need to break the other person in order to gain that control. So recognize the signs of potential abuse or control in your relationship. Recognize these before they escalate into more serious signs, into more serious behaviors. Because, you see, minor violence will escalate to more severe violence. So what are the types of abuse? We're familiar with physical abuse: hitting, pushing, kicking, threatening to do things to other people. There's also emotional abuse: verbal put-downs, criticisms, sarcasm, guilt trips, threats of abandonment. Sexual abuse, such as infidelity, rape, incest. Intellectual abuse, power trips, where you're always wrong, I'm always right. Spiritual abuse, using spirituality to control or dominate another person. A good friend of mine used to be a Bible thumper. And in the Bible, there was a reason for him to do anything he wanted to do. And he was able to control his wife by pointing to scriptures, to readings within the Bible that empowered him to do things. It's financial abuse, a biggie, creating financial dependence so that the other person is restricted in what they can do, and they're totally dependent on you. Refusing to account for money spent, controlling, withholding financial information, financial assets. So you see, there can be many causes for abuse: power, control, low self-esteem. It can be a learned pattern of behavior. We hear this all the time, where the person, as a child, was raised with being abused by parents. So they learn that this is the way you do things. This is the way you control other people. Sometimes it's a lack of impulse control, an unwillingness to accept responsibility. It's not my fault. She made me do it. I really didn't want to do it. She just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. What else could I do? I had to hit her. Now, one of the things, before I go any further, that I need to point out, I'm using a lot of examples of him and her, but abuse knows no gender. It's not men who abuse, people abuse. Men abuse, women abuse. So we all have to take responsibility for our actions, our behavior. We are the only ones that can control our behavior. We're the only ones that can make decisions about what we do, how we act. So remember, if you are experiencing abuse, it's not your fault. You're not alone. You're not to blame. You can't control how the other person is going to act. You can only control how you act. And there's never an acceptable excuse for abuse. Whatever the cause, it's not your job to avoid being abused. It's impossible. Each of us has to take responsibility for our behavior. So that brings you to the last part. What do we do? How do we avoid this abuse? As I said, the focus is on prevention. And in doing that, the focus is on accepting and taking responsibility for our own actions, for our own feelings, for our own thoughts. Amazingly, your relationship becomes what you think about, what you do, and what you put into it. Be honest with yourself and with your partner. Acknowledge and value them. Watch what you say to yourself. Abusive individuals tend to say really hostile things to themselves about other people. They work themselves up, and then it manifests itself in overt behavior. So watch what you say to each other. Words can destroy. What we call each other ultimately becomes what we think of each other. And as I said, it really matters. So recognize the potential signs and label them as potential abuse. Insist on respect and politeness. You don't have to always agree, but you must respect the dignity of the other person at all times. See, fighting in a marriage, as in most relationships, is a reality. But always stick to issues. Strive to resolve differences, never to destroy each other. Maintain your own self-esteem. Remember, you don't deserve to be abused. Your feelings, your preferences, your values are real. No one should be allowed to control them or deny them. And ultimately, safety first. If there's any risk of physical violence, be prepared to go to a safe place. Remember, what you think about in your relationship is what it becomes. I would like you now to visualize and to embrace the excitement, the anticipation, and the love you feel for your partner today. Forever hold that person in high self-esteem. Realize that you always have options. There is never a good excuse to be abusive to your spouse. Make a commitment to yourself and to your mate that abuse, be it physical, verbal, emotional, or any of the other types that I happened to mention this morning, it will not be a part of your relationship. It's simply not an option, never was, never can be. In conclusion, it's up to you and me to break this cycle of violence. We owe it to ourselves, we owe it to each other, we owe it to all those people whose lives we touch, whose lives we have touched, whose lives we will touch. So be good to each other. Let me offer a couple of examples from my practice. Actually, I mentioned that abuse knows no gender. As a psychologist, one of the very first clients I ever had the opportunity to counsel was this couple. He was a military man, upwards of 6'5", and she was a very tiny woman, under 5 foot. And she was extremely abusive. This woman would drink heavily and would throw beer bottles, whiskey bottles. There was frequent abuse, always from her part. He, being a very large, very powerful military man, was also very, very gentle individual, and he tended to suffer a lot of this. So here was a situation of where the work with the couple was with both of them, but she was the more physically violent one. And work had to be done to really work on her own dignity, her own self-esteem, and helping them to solve their problems in a relationship. Let me offer a second example. I mentioned that abuse is more than physical violence. It involves control. And it's interesting because one of the very first few times that I had the opportunity to be a part of this marriage preparation course, at the break, a young woman came up to me and said, Dr. Molino, I have a question for you. I don't know if I should worry, but there's something that my partner does which really bugs me. And it shouldn't, because I've got nothing to hide. But I'm confused by it. And she said, what he does is every time he comes to visit me in my apartment, the very first thing he does before he hugs me and kisses me or embraces me is he goes to my phone to check and see who's just recently called me. He goes through the phone. She said, should I worry? My answer was, you should worry. I mean, what should be the most important thing for him is seeing you. The love should be above everything else, not the control. You say you have nothing to worry about, but this bugs you. He should be able to trust you. Trust, as I said, is a very important part of a relationship, and control is what chokes that love, that trust. So these are some examples of how it creeps into a relationship. And the last example I'd like to give is with respect to the financial control. And as a father of a daughter, I was very sensitive to this when I heard about it in one of the talks, and I alerted my daughter to be very careful when she was getting married. This example was a young woman said to me, and this was after the marriage prep, was that she had her father had bought her a very nice new car prior to them getting married, and her partner drove this beat up old jalop, and so as they got into the marriage and they started running into some financial difficulties, they sat down And the decision was made that since her car was newer and was worth more, they could probably get more money for it. So her car was sold. Now, he kept his car, and he still had this freedom, this mobility. But she became extremely limited. And living in a rural community, she was stuck at home with very few means of getting around. And this consciously or unconsciously ended up being a terrible way of him controlling her mobility, controlling where she could go. And it ended up being controlled because she wasn't able to visit with friends. She wasn't able to go out with the girls. He continued to go to his hockey and ball and poker night. But she was stuck with talking on the phone instead of being able to go and to meet with the girls. So again, these are signs which initially may begin fairly innocently, but they escalate to control, to dominance, and to sadness in a relationship. So be conscious of all these different types of control. It's not just physical violence, it's the things we say, it's the control we try to impose on our partners, all of these which limit their freedom, which limit their independence, their dignity. These eat away at relationships. And the important thing is to look at keeping these out of your relationship, to be proactive, focus on prevention.